It's important to come out here and picket.
Because that I believe that these children have been given to these people by God, and that it is my duty by the commandment of God to be here.
Would you agree with me, Alan, that the pastors need to show up, need to take a lead in this thing? Would you agree with that?
I think the biggest problem is pastors aren't. If pastors would really be pastors, a shepherding type of a person, a caring for a flock type of person, that they would be here. And the reason we aren't seeing people in the churches out here is because we're not seeing their leaders out here. Yeah, I don't see where they have the right to not be here. Biblically, they ought to be here, and they ought to be encouraged in their flock to be here.
Now, it has long been a tenet of mine that the church has left government out of the picture, has not paid attention to government, but government is where all the laws that control all of our lives, that's where government either writes the laws or interprets the laws through the court or enforces the laws through various means. Would you agree with that?
Yes. In fact, the scripture says that when we go into the scripture, a person in the law is given the same term as a preacher. They're God's clergy to uphold good and to speak against wrong. And so their primary job is uphold good.
Okay.
And we ought to be doing that as believers. Instead of saying we can't say anything in our churches, we can't say anything in the public. No, that's our responsibility, is the same as it is as those who we elect to uphold what is right. They have a responsibility to God to uphold what is good.
And would you concur with me that Christians should be not only voting, all of us voting, but also looking in the mirror and saying, what office am I going to run for? Or what university am I going to be an important part of and run? Or how am I going to get involved in media? Not just standing on the sidelines. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I believe that we need to have Christians in politics.
We
can support. Go ahead.
Let me interrupt this a little bit. We have some interesting things going on in the back here. Would you care to focus on that? Then we have the sheriff coming up over here and a police officer.
Oh my God! Look at you! You're here. I am trying to help him. No, you're not. No, you're not. Yeah. Get away from me. I got my great grandson in here to Sure, but none you can afford, none you got that care to me, everybody here. You're full of shit. And repent. Oh.
You're living after your own will and not willing to live after God's will, are you?
Sure, that's why you intimidate these women, you men down
You
here.
are doing what God says.
Listen, what child have you helped in last week? What child have you helped last week? That was like, what child? Here you said with
I
your
work in a group home that helps hundreds of kids.
You work for your pay. What do you give for nothing? What do you give?
Want to know something?
You stand here with a damn sign, but what do you give for a child
Sure you could.
When I got her picture and put it on a deal and sit up there in the corner, I can do that?
You can.
You sure could.
I will.
Good, go for it, lady. That's not
I
a problem.
will.
Okay, you guys just keep it respectful,
We
okay?
are.
Just keep it respectful.
What children have you helped in the last year?
What's respectful about the children?
Where?
Killed in there, and her saying it's okay, and then my community.
She has a right to say that.
Have you helped any underprivileged children?
I've got 10 children. My income is below poverty level. I think I'm helping
Did you ever
children
hear
all the
of picking
time.
up cans to help pay for those kids? 10 kids. 10 kids.
I work 2 jobs is what I do.
8
Work
grandkids.
nights
And 2
as well as
great-grandchildren.
day jobs.
But women have rights to stand up for what they believe.
They're killing their own babies.
And no man is going to stand here and say, oh,
They're killing their own babies, their own flesh and blood. You had your
There should be more men out
that's
here.
right, she
protecting
didn't.
the women,
Here she stands.
protecting the
I
babies.
will raise any child that they don't want. Any. All.
Any and all. There's a Head Start down there. There's a Head Start there. Do you go help those kids? Do you go read to them?
Of course, the very same kids. The
Right
very
now-
same kids.
Okay,
but
what
I
day
don't-
were you there last
I'm
week?
paying my
What day were you?
taxes to keep Head Start going, and then I'm paying my tithes.
Diane, we're
But you know what? We have things that we do out of the goodness of our heart, not because we get paid.
No, you come
Diane.
with signs.
My wife and I are taking care of a baby right now because a mother's looking for a job, aren't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We are. She's in Texas
she's
looking for a
under-
So what
job,
are you doing
and
here?
we've been taking care of this
Where is-
child for a
where
month and a half.
is that
You're
woman's
telling me
father?
I'm not doing
Where
anything
is
to help
that-
people?
Where is that baby's father?
Lord
Where's that
only
baby's
knows.
father?
Lord
Baby's
only knows.
Why don't you go chase him down, and then maybe this would stop?
I've already told the
You
father
go
what his
chase the
problem.
Why are you
Yeah.
chasing women?
I'm not chasing women.
What are you
I've got a
doing here?
wife, and I'm
Is this
out
not a
chasing
clinic for
women.
women? Is this not a clinic for women?
They are under a curse by God, and I am helping them.
You're full of
If they will
shit.
listen to what God has to say, they'll be. They can receive God's blessing.
You're full of it.
Well, when we stand before God, you'll find out that what we did was what God planned, and it was good for the women. It's better to be blessed and be in God's eternal existence forever.
think you're
than to
blessed
be
for
in,
this?
Yes,
God says an eye for an eye. Well,
that's why. That's
What
right, and
comes
they're
an
going
eye
to get
for
their
an eye?
justice of an eye for an eye.
Ma'am,
You really believe
I'm not
that,
killing
then
any.
ma'am,
say it was okay that I take the life of the abortionist, but we're not out here to do
I have
this,
nothing to say
and
to
you're
you.
not.
I raised
But
mine.
I want
That's
you to
enough.
know, I
I
helped
raised
the
mine,
lady
too.
when
Okay,
nobody
that's
else
enough.
would help.
That's enough. Okay.
You did.
That's enough.
I did. God will show it to
You
you.
guys are welcome to do your thing. Just,
Thank
and I
you.
understand people are going to have something to say about it, as you guys do. Just keep it respectful. All right.
thank you, officer.
You know, people say that people are not for women. What I was trying to tell this lady was, about 10 years ago when I was in Great Falls, and I was with a group of about 20 men. 2 men, a lady came out of a bar screaming. She said, they're going to beat me up, they're going to beat me up. 2 men came out. I was among the smallest of the guys that were there. I was the only one that ran over to that corner where that lady was at. And I stood between her and those 2 men. And I said, what's the matter? And they said, we're going to beat her up. And I said, no, you're not. I never touched them physically. I just stood my ground, and they said, get out of the way, we're going to beat her up. And I said, no, you're not. I'm for helping women. 20 other guys, and these were all church. I was just coming from a church function. And there was pastors there. Not one person but myself went over there. And those 2 guys could have easily beat me up. That's the same problem we're having here today. Where are the people to help the women?
We're still praying that you'll get
Now, this lady who came up, was she just walking on the sidewalk, or did it appear that she had made a particular effort to come over?
Maryland, because I walked over here myself.
Let me ask Marilyn this. Marilyn, this lady that you were talking to, was she just walking by, or did she make a special effort to come talk to you? Or could you tell?
Well, evidently they were driving by, and I think they saw Lewis out there on Broadway, and parked their car, and her and her husband came down so that she could tell us off. She was telling us we didn't have a right to be out here. She was telling us that we were chasing women. She was telling us that we're lying, that, you know, we should be going helping kids at Head Start. You know, well, maybe that's her ministry. That's what God's told her to do, but God's told us to be out here and save children. I mean, a little child can't even have a moment in Head Start if they're not born in the first place, but she wouldn't answer me when I asked her if she'd ever paid for an abortion or taken somebody to have an abortion or had one herself. I mean, anybody that's that adamant to defend baby killing and be so mad at somebody who's out here to say that it's wrong has had some connection to it somehow, and she's in denial, and she's justifying it by yelling at us.
Now, this situation that just happened, is this a rare situation, this kind of confrontation, or does this happen frequently?
Oh, it's pretty rare, but it happens often enough that, I don't know, but we rejoice in it because it's an opportunity to be able to take a stand and say that the killing should stop and hopefully educate somebody.
When you say often enough, are you talking about once a week, once a month, once every 2 or 3 months? What's your estimate?
Well, something like that with her, that's probably happened just maybe 3 times. It happens more often down in front of Planned Parenthood, actually, when we stand down there. It's happened quite a few times down there. But out here it's a little more rare, I think, because we're off the beaten path a little bit. But I pray for it. I want it to happen. You know.
Do you find that the discussion is fruitful, or does it seem that any minds are changed?
What I see it as is people they're taking a stand on one side or the other. And God, yeah, He already knows. He knows where they're at. But they have an opportunity right then to choose life or choose death, to choose God or choose evil. And I think that's what this is all about, is, you know, people... I mean, every person that drives by and gives us a thumb up or a thumb down is choosing their destiny. And I think that's what life is all about. That's what the end times is going to be about. I mean, God's going to be separating the wheat from the chaff, and you know, and that lady coming out here, we're going to pray for her. I mean, she's left an imprint on my mind and my heart now that's going to last for a long time, and I'm going to be praying for her, and that's God's will. That she may have somebody that's praying for her, that's praying that she'll cross the path of a Christian. Well, she did today. She crossed the path of a few Christians, and you know, some people would say, well, you know, that little thing that happened wasn't a good representation, wasn't very loving, but, you know, it was truth-telling, and it was, I believe, how Christians should be. You know, we're not supposed to be shut up behind our 4 walls and so more loving than Jesus. We're supposed to be exposing the evil. We're supposed to be telling the truth. We're supposed to be standing in the gap for the fatherless and declaring God's word and His purpose and living out God's purpose, being obedient and being willing to enter into discussions like that and you know, dispel the propaganda that people are being told. We can't, I mean, otherwise she can live in her lie with her eyes blinded by the propaganda if nobody's out here to tell her the truth.
Well, it's an interesting little event that happened this morning.
Well, the police showed up. I mean, they get educated. You know, I mean, every time a cop gets called, and cops get called, You know, the abortion clinic will call them for the least little thing. Well, the cops can come out, and we've gotten to know some of them, and they know what we're about. They know who we are. They know we're not of any threat to any women. We're not chasing women. We're not shooting abortionists. We're not violent. But by golly, we are going to stand our ground, and we're not going to be chased away. We're the ones that people try and chase away when they try and get us to leave. They try and tell us all the time we don't have the right to be out here, that we should be doing something else. Don't we have a life is often very common. They'll yell at us, get a life, you know, and it always kind of strikes me a little bit funny that they'll tell us to get a life and yet support the death that's going on in here.
This is 2005, and this is the Blue Mountain Clinic in Missoula, Montana. The many cameras around the building.
Many of those we revere as our teachers and spiritual leaders actually walked on the same ground, drank the same water, watched the same moon, and were warmed by the same sun as I am today. What would these greatest minds of all time like us to know? I think that we can take ancient wisdom, the wisdom of the ages, and begin to apply it in each and every one of our lives every single day.
Dr. Wayne Dyer is America's foremost teacher of transformational wisdom. Author, psychotherapist, professor, and lecturer, he holds a doctorate in educational counseling from Wayne State University. Dr. Dyer has written over 10 best-selling books, including Your Erroneous Zones, Real Magic, and Manifest Your Destiny, which have inspired 50 million readers worldwide. Now, Dr. Wayne Dyer will help you enrich your life and achieve your dreams by putting into action the principles taught by the greatest minds and spiritual teachers in history. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. This program is about what I call the wisdom of the ages. It's an intriguing thing for me that I spent some time in Greece just recently with my friend Deepak Chopra and his wife, Rita, and my wife, Marceline. And we did a seminar for a couple of thousand people in Greece over a period of 3 or 4 days. And then we had the opportunity to tour the Parthenon and the Acropolis with a Greek historian, a history professor from, who was retired from Greece. He's a beautiful man. We had a wonderful day. And while we were walking through the ruins and listening to all of the stories of all of the great teachers who we've learned so much from in Greece, from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and Demosthenes and Pythagoras and people like this that we've all sort of taken for granted in our lives. I had a very wonderful sensation, and I shared it with Deepak while we were listening to one of the things that the history professor was telling us. He said something to the effect that over here on this particular place is where Socrates was forced to drink hemlock because of stating his views about man's freedom and so on. And I had this sense that all of us are really walking on the very same ground that these great teachers who've come before us have walked. And they're having their bodies warmed by the exact same sun that warms our bodies. And when they would look out at night, they would look out at the very same moon that we look out every night. And they were drinking literally the same water that we drank and breathing the exact same air that we breathe today. And there's a sense of a connection to all of these people. And while I was up there and talking and listening and having this almost a spiritual experience of feeling connected to these people, I realized that they felt very strongly about what they believed, so strongly in fact that they often sacrificed their lives in order to be able to say it, to put it down, and we take it for granted today, this great wisdom that they provided for us. So that our connection to these great masters, these ancient people, is really a connection of more than just words and more than what we read. It's a connection of spirit. And I told Deepak, I said, when I get back, and I said this to my wife as well, when I get back, I am going to write. I'm going to take 60 of these people, the great teachers of the last 25 or 30 centuries. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take one of their contributions, whether it's a poem or a piece of their philosophy or a piece of one of their speeches or whatever, and I'd just like to put it at the top, and then I would like to write what I believe that these people were saying to us. And it's an extraordinary experience to put yourself into a position where you challenge yourself, because I had 60 days free to do this writing, and I wanted to write 60 essays. And in addition to writing the 60 essays, I wanted to read everything that I could that they had contributed. And in addition to that, I wanted to read as much about them as I could, but I had to do it all in one day. So it was every day I would take on the challenge of immersing myself in this literature, all I could find out about them, and then I would take a picture or a portrait of these people. And these people ran a gamut from some of the people that I mentioned from the early Greeks to people in the East like Patanjali and Buddha and Jesus and Omar Khayyam and some of the great poets of the Renaissance and the great artists like Michelangelo and Da Vinci and John Keats and Percy Shelley and Yeats and some of the more contemporary people like Martin Luther King and Mother Teresa. And I took this whole collection of some 60 people, many of whom I'll talk about and speak about here in this program. And all of them were saying something to us. And one of the things I think that they were saying to us that really resonates with me is, don't die with your music still in you. And a lot of people do. In fact, it's my experience in working with people over the past quarter of a century or so that too many of us, and those especially who experience a level of frustration and disappointment in their lives. I remember the wonderful novel, The Death of Ivan Illich, And there was Ivan laying on his deathbed, and he was contemplating this question that would be a horrible question to have to contemplate. He said, what if my life has been wrong? What if my life has been wrong? What if I didn't really do what I came here to do? Because part of me really knows, more than just believes, but knows that when you're born and when you show up here, your work shows up here with you. It's placed in your heart. And too often we ignore it in the name of fulfilling a destiny that has been laid out for us by other people and so on. So these people that I will be referring to, what I call ancient wisdom, this ancient wisdom came from people who felt something very profound in their hearts that they absolutely knew that they had to express. And it's almost as if you have to find within yourself what it is that you know you are here for and follow that instinct independent of what anybody else out there might think about it, without being objectionable and nasty and recalcitrant and so on, but still having within you this knowing that I have certain music that I have to play. I have certain things that I have to do. And I feel it deeply, and I feel connected to that. And not allowing myself to do it means that I might spend that time. I might get to that place at the end of my life and say, what if it's been wrong? What if I didn't listen to that inner voice?
The words of some of the greatest poets and philosophers, writers, and spiritual leaders of civilization can teach us much about how to improve our daily lives. The great teachers all had something very profound that we had to memorize to get through English 101 or a psychology course or a philosophy course or a humanities course, but something that could get us through a life course, something that could get us through each and every one of our days in how to deal more effectively with each other and how to create prosperity for myself and my life and how to go through my life with a sense of peace and joy and bliss despite what was going around me. Despite whatever was happening outside of me, I have that within me. The wisdom of the ages can teach us how to make our lives work at a higher and more profound and more peaceful and more loving way each and every day, and we need to pay much more attention to it.
There's two things about these people that I think are significant. One is what they were like, and the second is what they had to say. And one of them is an ancient teacher. His name is Patanjali. And Patanjali is known in the ancient world 1 to 3 centuries before the birth of Christ. There's no actual date of actual record of his birth and death. And he was the one who wrote the original Yoga Sutras and wrote a wonderful book that I immersed myself in a few years back called How to Know God. And Patanjali, one of the things that he said to these people, now remember we're talking about something that's going back maybe 3,500 years or more. And here was this great teacher in the ancient world. And this is one of the things that he said. When you are inspired, the word inspired comes from in spirit. I don't know if you've ever noticed that when you're truly inspired in your life, that is, when you're doing what you know you're here for, everything seems to work. The right people show up. You don't worry about being hungry. You don't worry about being tired. You're not concerned with whether or not anybody's going to like it or not. When you're truly inspired, that is, whether it's cooking or being with your children or writing or composing music or filling out tax forms, whatever it might be, when you feel inspired, everything works. The reason that everything works is because you have left the material, the physical world, the world of the ego, and you've moved into the world of spirit. And when you move into the world of spirit, into that invisible world, you get connected. And inspiration means inspired. And Patanjali said, when you are inspired by some great purpose,
some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction. And you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive. And you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. There's some very important wisdom in that. This idea of finding yourself inspired means that you allow these dormant forces, these things that are in every single one of us, to come alive. Consciousness begins to expand. Things begin to show up in your life. You begin to manage the coincidences of your life. Things that you thought, and everybody has these kinds of experiences where your attention is on something, where you're thinking about something. I don't know, maybe it's your sister who lives in another city, in another part of the world. And you can't get your mind off of her, and you haven't talked to her for 5 years. And the telephone rings. And it's your sister. And when those things happen, you go, booga, booga, booga. What's going on here? And you call everybody that you know. And you say, you're not going to believe what happened. Everybody's got a story like that. And it happens to them on a regular basis. I was just thinking about that. And you showed up. Somebody told me that here this evening. I didn't even know that I was going to be coming to this. And a friend of mine, I just ran into him, and he said, he's speaking here, and would you like to come to this television show? And he said, I just can't believe that it happened. I said, but when you start, what happens is when you start to get inspired in your life, you start to reach new levels, and things begin to... But if you believe that it can't, or if you think it's just a coincidence, which is an interesting word, because in mathematics, coincidence talks about angles that coincide. They coincide. It's perfect. There's a perfection in coincidence. But we think that it just means that it was just some lucky thing that just sort of happened to me. And it was just something that is in the world of chance. And I'd like to suggest that managing those coincidences and getting yourself inspired is one of the great lessons we can learn from these ancient teachers. There's something that is called the perennial philosophy. It was a book written by Aldous Huxley. And I've read it many times and read through it and quoted from it, and it's a big part of my life. And what he did is he looked at the wisdom of ancient people. And he looked at the wisdom of contemporary people. He looked at Eastern and Western religions. He looked at philosophy from the Native Americans and people who lived in tribes and the Stoic philosophers and so on. He studied all of these different people, and he said there's a perennial philosophy. And this perennial philosophy is something that human beings have believed in since we have something called recorded history. They've all believed in that. And there's two things that all societies and all peoples have embraced, no matter what time they appeared here on this planet. He said the first is that they know that there is a world beyond the world of the changing. Beyond the world of the changing. So that the world of the changing, when Lao Tzu, the great ancient founder of the Tao, back in the 5th century BC, founder of Taoism, a beautiful sort of philosophy which is all summarized in about 83 pages. It's great. You can read it in an afternoon. And Lao Tzu was asked the question, what is real, Master? What is real? And his response was, that is real, which never changes. So almost as if you have to look at your own life and your own self, and you have to ask the question, what part of me meets that criteria? What part of me says, I am eternal? I have always been. What part of you has never changed? I don't know about you, but it's not my body. I promise you that. My body has undergone dramatic changes, but there's inside of this body, there is a witness. And this witness is noticing and observing
and has never aged or never changed. Lao Tzu said the second thing that historically everyone has believed in is that we are connected to that world that is never changing, that it is a part of us. We live with it. It's within us. So that these two qualities, when I look at one of the great letters I ever received in my life, I want to share this with you. It's written by, because I've never met this guy, and maybe, just maybe, he's going to watch this show someplace. He wrote it to me on the 11th of September, 1986. It's actually written to, by a teacher in Arkansas, in Crossett, Arkansas. Her name is Gail Thomas. And the letter goes like this. She says, "Dear Dr. Dyer, as a class assignment, I asked my gifted, talented students to write about something in our gifted class. My idea was that they would write about some of the material we had covered during the first week. She said, I do give the children a certain leeway with my direction, but I was completely taken by surprise when Ronnie Terrell, a fidgety boy in my last period class, wrote this jewel. I had your book, The Sky's the Limit, propped up on my chalk tray, and apparently this is what caught Ronnie's eye. She said, I've seen you many times on The Tonight Show, and I felt that with your sense of humor, you would love this." This is Ronnie Terrell's impressions of the class after looking at my picture for 1 week. He says, Dr. Wayne Dyer is slick-headed. His barber was probably drunk, or he was caught by an Indian. And then he has this wonderful line that only a little twerpy kid like I was at one time sitting in the back row could write. He says, I wonder if flies slide off of his head. He said maybe he was once a magician and he did a disappearing act and he came back but his hair forgot to. Poor man, he says, his wife used to give him head and shoulders and now she comes home with mop and glow. And he goes on and on. Ronnie Terrell, all right? But he speaks to something that is very relevant, and that is this whole idea that everything that we see in the physical world is changing. I was giving a talk not too long ago in Baltimore, and I was sitting just jotting down a few things that I wanted to talk about that evening, and there was a mirrored wall right next to me. The whole wall was mirrored. And I was feeling really great. I had just run about 10 miles, and I was just feeling really up and terrific, and I had a nice big audience coming that night, and everything was just really great. And I looked up over at the wall, and then I looked down again, and then I looked again real fast. Have you ever done that where you look in the mirror and you say, who is that in there? And I looked down, and I looked in again. And then I stopped, and I put my pen down, and I started staring at this face that was looking back at me. And I said, there's an old man in there renting my face. That's not me. You see, the part of me that is in here, that has been watching this, that has been observing this, that has been noticing this, has never aged and never does. It never can. I remember one time I was out running when we were on the road, and my wife was with me, and I'd been running for a couple of hours and early in the morning, and it was a real beautiful, crisp morning, and she waved at me, and she said, come on, we're going to have breakfast or something, and I stopped running, and I ran across this field, and there was a fence. The fence was about this high, and I ran up to the fence, and I hurled over the fence. I just jumped over the fence. And she looked at me, she said, you can't do that. I said, do what? She said, you're 56 years old. You don't jump over fences when you're 56 years old. You could kill yourself. I said, I forgot. And the part of me that's in here, that's noticing, that's watching, and the part of you that's in you, watching, things are falling. You've noticed that, right? Things are wrinkling. Things are turning gray. There's a process of shifting and changing, but there's a world beyond that. And all of these great teachers speak to that world, the world that is beyond the world of the changing. And it's almost as if we have to begin to know that world. There's a famous poem by Emily Dickinson, who's one of the people I wrote about in Wisdom of the Ages. Emily Dickinson, who in